Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right on the outside, but inside, something is off? Like your thoughts don't match your actions. Your mouth says you're fine, but your chest is tight and your energy is leaking somewhere you can't name. You wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from fighting yourself all day. There's a subtle war happening between who you want to be and how you actually behave. And every time you ignore it, you teach your brain to stop trusting you. Let that sink in. Every behavior you repeat is a message to your nervous system. Every time you procrastinate, stay silent when you should speak, scroll instead of move, say yes when you mean no. You're training your brain to betray you. Your stomach knots before you even open your eyes. Your chest tightens with the weight of your own avoidance. And that exhaustion you carry? It's not physical. It's emotional self-abandonment practiced for years, wrapped in the costume of just another day. Here's the brutal truth. It's not your thoughts keeping you stuck. It's your behavior. And worse, your behavior is lying to your brain every single day. You say you want to change, but your actions are reinforcing the opposite. You're not unmotivated. You're misconditioned. You've built a loop, silent, predictable, deeply wired, and that loop is now stronger than your willpower. But here's what no one told you. You can't think your way into a new life. You have to behave your way there. Because behavior doesn't just reflect mindset, it builds it. The chemicals in your brain, dopamine, cortisol, serotonin, they're not just moods, they're signals, reinforcements. They respond to what you do, not what you hope for. And right now, you're programming yourself to expect failure. You're rehearsing disappointment with your own hands. But this can change, and it doesn't require motivation. It requires precision, clarity, and emotional honesty you probably weren't taught to have. You're not broken, you're conditioned. And every conditioned loop can be interrupted if you're willing to see the pattern. In this journey, I'm going to show you exactly how your daily actions, tiny, repeated, harmless moments, are shaping your identity, rewiring your mindset, and building your future without your permission. And then, I'll show you how to reclaim that permission, to use neuroscience, not noise, to reprogram your habits, not your self-worth, to build a mindset that follows your behavior, not fights against it. Because the truth is, you don't rise to the level of your vision, you fall to the pattern your nervous system trusts. So if you're tired of falling quietly, if you're ready to stop lying to your brain with your own actions, keep listening. Everything changes now. You've been told to fix your mindset, like it's some switch you can flip with a better attitude or a motivational playlist. But here's what's really happening. Your mindset isn't broken. It's following instructions. Your instructions, sent through your behavior every single day. The way you wake up, what you reach for, how you breathe when tension rises, how often you override your gut with what feels easier. Each action, no matter how small, is part of a behavioral feedback loop. And this loop is invisible until it isn't. That's why change feels impossible, because you're not fighting your thoughts. You're fighting the habits that train those thoughts. Think about it. You snooze your alarm again. That's not laziness. It's repetition. You've taught your nervous system that your goals are optional, and your brain, doing exactly what it was designed to do, adapts. Now every time you even think about waking up early, your body feels heavy, your willpower dissolves, and self-trust drains through your chest like a slow leak. This isn't weakness, it's reinforcement. Behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner proved decades ago that we don't just act randomly, we respond to patterns of reinforcement. Rewarded behaviors repeat. Avoided discomfort becomes a habit. And comfort, even the toxic kind, gets mistaken for safety. But here's the catch no one tells you. Most of your rewards are emotional. You avoid the workout, and the short-term relief is the dopamine hit. You lie to avoid conflict, and the absence of tension feels like success. You stay small, quiet, agreeable, and your brain says, "See, no threat. Good job." Except, you're dying inside. Your body knows. It holds the weight of the lies your actions keep telling. That tight jaw before a meeting, the shallow breath when someone asks what you want, the ache in your gut when you say yes but mean no. Your behavior is scripting your identity, and your identity is shaping your mindset. This is the loop. Not just a habit, a story your nervous system believes. You've rehearsed the same emotional narrative so many times, your brain stopped asking for permission. It just follows the script. Stay small, stay stuck, stay safe. But safety isn't peace, and staying small isn't noble. It's learned helplessness in disguise. Here's the brutal part. You're not failing because you lack clarity. You're failing because your behavior keeps proving your fears right. But this is the turning point, because now you're starting to see the loop, and awareness is the first interruption. Keep going. You're about to meet the version of you that your habits have been hiding. You've seen the loop. You've started to feel it. How your behaviors aren't just habits, but instructions your brain follows like a script. Now we go deeper. Because here's what most people never realize. Your behaviors don't just reflect your emotions. They generate them, and they do it chemically. Every action you take, every choice, every avoidance sends signals to your brain. And your brain doesn't judge. It just responds. You hit snooze, cortisol creeps in. You avoid that hard conversation, dopamine drops, then rebounds later with guilt. You move your body, breathe deeply, follow through on one promise. Dopamine rises. Confidence swells. Not because of a mindset, but because your brain is chemically reinforcing self-trust. This is how emotional states are built. Not through wishful thinking, but through repeated chemical feedback loops. And most of the time, it's happening without your awareness, which means you might be chemically reinforcing the exact identity you're trying to outgrow. Let's slow that down. If every time you feel discomfort, you scroll, snack, escape, or overthink, you're rewarding avoidance. And dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reinforcement, doesn't care why you did it. It just registers. You survived. Let's do that again. This is how self-sabotage gets chemically rewarded. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is brilliant, just running an outdated program. And this leads us to one of the most misunderstood truths in psychology. Your brain learns what to desire based on what you repeatedly give it. Not what's healthy, not what's right, just what's familiar. That's why change feels so unnatural at first. Because chemically, your brain is still craving the comfort of sabotage. It's not just about willpower, it's about neuroplasticity, the ability of your brain to rewire itself through repetition. Dr. Andrew Huberman explains this beautifully. Behavior creates brain state, not the other way around. You act. The chemistry shifts. The shift becomes a signal. That signal becomes a pattern. Repeat it enough, and it becomes your personality. But here's the brutal truth. If you're not intentionally creating that pattern, your environment and default behaviors are doing it for you. That anxiety you feel before making a decision, it's not just emotional, it's biochemical memory. Your brain remembers how you've handled similar moments. It floods your system with the neurochemical cocktail it expects you to feel. But expectation isn't destiny. It's just prediction. And predictions can be updated. When you choose the harder behavior, the one that stretches your nervous system instead of numbing it, you send a shockwave through your chemical feedback loop. At first, it feels wrong, heavy, wrong. But it's not wrong. It's new. And new, to a brain wired for survival, feels like danger. This is the price of evolution. Emotional discomfort paired with biochemical dissonance. But ride it long enough, and you start reinforcing a different identity. You've felt the chemical shifts. You're starting to understand how behavior triggers neurochemistry, and how that chemistry reinforces identity. But here's what most people miss. Your body knows before your brain admits it. The tension in your shoulders before you say yes to something you hate. The shallow breath when your phone lights up with their name. The heat in your neck when you stay quiet to avoid conflict. These aren't random. They're data. And your nervous system is screaming it. But you've been taught to ignore it, to intellectualize instead, to think your way through feelings, to be rational, even when your stomach is twisted in knots. Here's the brutal truth. You've learned to override your body so well. You've lost access to your truth. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio revealed something most people still don't understand. We don't think first and feel second. We feel first. Our decisions begin in the body. Subtle sensations that arise before words even form. Only afterward does the mind catch up and create a story to explain what the body already knew. And this leads us to a fundamental fracture. If your behavior keeps ignoring your body's signals, you train your system to suppress, not to solve. You delay the emotion. You bury the discomfort. You tighten your jaw and smile anyway. But emotions don't disappear. They relocate. They show up as fatigue, tension, fog, resentment, And overreactions you can't explain. You say, I don't know why I snapped, but your body knew. It's been holding that scream for weeks. This is the cost of disconnection. You become a stranger to yourself, a well-functioning actor, outwardly composed, internally collapsing. But here's the shift no one told you was possible. Reconnection isn't poetic, it's practical. You don't have to heal your entire past to come back to yourself. You just have to start noticing again. Pause before reacting. Scan your body like it matters. Trust the heat, the tightness, the sudden stillness. They're signals, not flaws. When you align your behavior with what your body actually needs, safety, truth, boundaries, your entire system starts to recalibrate. Dopamine rises with integrity. Cortisol lowers with congruence. And most importantly, your brain begins to believe you again. Because when your actions match your inner signals, you restore internal coherence. And coherence is the birthplace of clarity. You're not at war with yourself. You're just overdue for reconnection. Let's begin. You've started to feel it. How the body speaks before the mind catches up. How your actions shape your chemistry. But here's what most people still miss. Your brain isn't reacting. It's predicting. It's not waiting to see what happens. It's constantly guessing what you'll feel next, based on what you've done before. And this leads us to one of the most overlooked truths about mindset. It's not a fixed belief. It's a forecast. According to neuroscientist Feldman Barrett, your emotions are not built in. They're built by you. Every time you move through the world, your brain is calculating, what does this mean? What emotion should I prepare? And the source it pulls from, your behavioral history. This is why your anxiety feels automatic. Why your hopelessness shows up even when life looks stable. Why you flinch emotionally in situations where nothing's wrong, but something inside still braces for impact. It's not a flaw. It's your predictive brain doing its job. But the job it's doing is outdated. Every skipped boundary, every people-pleasing yes, every hour numbing yourself on autopilot, it all becomes part of your prediction archive. And your brain learns fast. It learns that silence equals safety, that stress is normal, that your body doesn't get what it needs, so it should stop asking, that your life runs on survival mode. And here's the brutal truth. If your brain expects emotional chaos, it will find ways to recreate it, even in calm moments. Because calm, to a brain trained in conflict, feels unsafe. That's why self-sabotage feels weirdly comfortable. Why peace can trigger panic. Because your mind isn't living in the present, it's forecasting the past into your future. But this is not permanent. Your predictions can change, but not by thinking differently, by doing differently, again and again, until the prediction system updates. This is emotional neuroplasticity. When you behave in a way that contradicts your emotional forecast, the brain takes notice. You set a boundary, your system expects rejection, but receives respect. That's new data. You pause instead of reacting. Your body waits for punishment. Nothing comes. New data. It doesn't change everything at once, but the loop begins to crack. Over time, those cracks become openings. Openings where you feel something foreign, but good. Peace without fear. Confidence without arrogance. Joy without waiting for it to be taken away. And that's when you know your predictions are shifting. Not because your mindset changed first, but because your behavior taught your brain a new future. Your body remembers. Your brain predicts. But here's what still holds you back. What keeps you circling the same stuckness, no matter how much you understand yourself. You're being rewarded for your self-sabotage. Not consciously, not obviously, but neurologically, behaviorally, repeatedly. And this leads us into the dark genius of how your environment and emotional history shaped your daily actions into an invisible prison. B.F. Skinner, the behavioral psychologist who reshaped modern psychology, proved something we rarely apply to ourselves. We repeat what gets reinforced, even if it's toxic, even if it hurts. If there's a payoff, relief, approval, escape, silence, your brain learns, this works. So what happens when avoidance feels safer than expression? When burnout earns praise? When people-pleasing protects you from rejection? You get rewarded for disappearing. You get reinforced for betraying yourself. And the worst part? You don't even realize it's happening. You think you're bad with discipline. You call it procrastination, anxiety, indecision. But underneath those labels is one brutal truth. You've been conditioned to choose short-term safety over long-term alignment. Every time you delay the thing that matters, your dream, your boundary, your truth, your nervous system sighs in relief. And that relief? That's reinforcement. That's dopamine. That's your brain saying, well done, you avoided discomfort. Let's do it again. So your habits become less about goals and more about escaping threat. And your life becomes a map of everything you feared, avoided, and minimized. Here's where it hits deep. Most of your self-sabotage isn't rebellion. It's survival. It was born in environments where your truth cost you something. Connection, love, peace, approval. So you adapted, you shrank, you overachieved, you numbed, and it worked. Until it didn't. Because now the conditions are gone, but the conditioning remains. That's what makes this loop so hard to break. It feels like you're choosing failure. But really, failure is just the familiar reward, the emotion your body expects after any bold move. But here's what's really happening. You're not afraid of success. You're afraid of the emotions your success would contradict. The fear, the guilt, the loss of who you've been. This is the moment of rupture. Because once you name the reward, you can interrupt it. You can stop giving your nervous system cheap dopamine in exchange for deep dissatisfaction. And instead, you can begin rewarding what actually matters. Honesty, congruence, momentum. You're not self-sabotaging. You're obeying a reward system that forgot who you are. Let's remind it. You've seen the loop. You've felt the sabotage dressed as safety. But here's the moment most people get stuck. They become aware of the pattern, and then wait to feel different before acting different. But here's what's really happening. You don't need a breakthrough. You need a behavioral rupture. Because your nervous system doesn't follow clarity. It follows repetition. So if you want to break the loop, you can't wait for motivation. You need friction, direction, and a new reward structure. This is where Dr. Andrew Huberman's work hits like lightning. He teaches that your behavior doesn't need to match your emotion. It just needs to lead it. Because when you act, your brain doesn't argue. It adapts. You show up to the hard thing. Even with resistance, that action spikes dopamine. That dopamine marks the moment, and your brain starts rewriting the story. Maybe this isn't a threat. Maybe this is growth. It doesn't take months. It takes pattern interrupts, consistently repeated. You want to rebuild identity. Start with integrity. Micro-integrity. Say what you mean. Move when you resist. Close the loop. Every time your nervous system tries to open a backdoor called later. This is neuroplasticity in real time. You teach your brain that discomfort doesn't mean danger, and over time, it stops flinching. But let's be honest. At first, it won't feel like progress. It'll feel like walking through wet cement with a screaming child on your back. Why? Because your old loop isn't just mental, it's chemical. The brain craves what it recognizes, and sabotage, no matter how painful, is familiar. So the beginning of change feels wrong, not because it is, but because your nervous system is calibrated to dysfunction. This is where most people quit. They confuse discomfort with misalignment. But discomfort is just withdrawal from the neurochemical cocktail you've been unconsciously addicted to. And this leads us to your next move. Stop negotiating with your impulses. Design around them. Use friction wisely. Set up your space so the wrong behavior feels harder to access. Put your phone in another room. Block the site. Say no before you can overthink it. Create rituals that reward what you want to become, not what you're trying to escape. Because you're not just building a habit, you're teaching your brain what safety actually feels like through congruent, embodied action. And once your nervous system starts experiencing that new safety consistently, the identity begins to shift, not through force, but through familiarity. This is where the old you starts dissolving, not with fanfare, with quiet, unshakable proof. You kept your word. You've broken the loop, not by thinking your way out, but by behaving your way through. And that leads us to one of the most misunderstood truths in personal growth. Mindset isn't something you have, it's something you embody. It's not a vision board, it's not a mantra. It's the nervous system response you build through repeated action aligned with truth. You don't have discipline, you become it. Every time you show up when it's easier not to. You don't have self-worth, you prove it. Every time you stop negotiating your boundaries. And this is where your real identity starts to surface. Not the version of you shaped by fear, approval, or protection, but the one you've been quietly becoming through every uncomfortable, aligned choice. At first, it feels subtle, like waking up with a little more quiet in your chest, less noise in your head. You don't flinch at your calendar. You don't dread your own promises, because your behavior stopped betraying you. But here's what's really happening. Your nervous system has started to trust you again. You're no longer triggering cortisol just by thinking about progress. You're generating dopamine through action, not distraction. And your brain has begun to recognize a new pattern of safety, earned through micro-integrity. This is why lasting mindset isn't intellectual. It's somatic, felt, lived, practiced. You know you've shifted when the things that used to drain you stop defining you. You no longer need to defend your rest, your pace, your no, because your choices speak louder than your fears now. And they echo back to you in the form of peace, not perfection, but coherence. This is what embodied mindset actually means. Your body, behavior, and beliefs start moving in the same direction. No more pretending. No more oscillating between ambition and avoidance. No more building a life that looks good online but feels like chaos inside. But here's the brutal part. You'll still be tested. Your old self won't die quietly. The loop will whisper. The pull will return. The familiar will call. And that's when you remember. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent enough to stay anchored in who you've chosen to become. Because embodiment isn't a state, it's a practice. And practice is what turns momentum into identity. We'll reach the turning point, where your story becomes something you author, not something you survive. Where your behaviors stop reacting to the past and begin designing the future. You're closer than you think, not because you believe it, but because, this time, your actions say it. You've practiced consistency. You've stopped negotiating with your impulses. You've begun to act like someone your nervous system can trust. And now, something quiet begins to shift. Not dramatic, not flashy, but real. You start to feel different in rooms you used to shrink in. You speak slower, with less apology in your tone. Your decisions land with more weight, more clarity. There's less static in your head, less ache in your chest. And here's what's really happening. You're not just behaving differently, you're becoming someone else. Or maybe, finally, becoming yourself. This is the moment people wait for, the shift. But it doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like relief. Like your body finally exhaling after years of holding someone else's story. The self-sabotage? You see it now, not as failure, but as a survival script. The procrastination, the people-pleasing, the avoidance, all of it made sense back then. But now, you've outlived the story. You don't need to fix yourself. You just need to stop abandoning who you were before the fear began. And this is the rebirth, not the cliché kind. Not a polished Instagram version of transformation, but the real, messy, embodied kind. The kind that feels like walking barefoot into your own life, calloused, honest, and wide awake. And this leads us to something even deeper. You were never meant to think your way into a new life. You were meant to behave your way there. Not by perfection, not by pressure, but by micro movements of alignment, by rituals of integrity, by the quiet courage of doing what matters, especially when it's inconvenient. You don't rise to the level of your affirmations. You rise, or fall, to the level of your patterns. But now, your patterns are different. Your brain has new data. Your body has new proof. And your identity, it's no longer a reaction. It's a design. This is the transformation most people never reach. Not because it's impossible, but because they give up too soon, waiting to feel ready instead of choosing to act different. But you didn't. You came this far. And that matters, because now you know, change isn't magic. It's biology. It's chemistry. It's honesty in motion. You're not broken. You were misconditioned. And now, you're rewriting the code. One aligned behavior at a time. You're not starting over. You're arriving, finally, fully, powerfully. And this time, you're not going back. Take a moment, not to think, just to feel, to notice the quiet shift inside you. Because if you've come this far, something real has moved. You didn't just learn about mindset. You experienced what it means to reclaim your behavior as a tool of identity. And maybe for the first time, you stopped blaming your brain for patterns it didn't choose. What you've just walked through wasn't a lesson. It was a reintroduction to yourself, The self beneath the chaos. The self that was never broken, just conditioned. The self that's been quietly waiting for you to stop performing and start listening. You now know. Your behavior doesn't just express who you are, it builds who you become. Your nervous system isn't working against you, it's working off old data. And your identity isn't fixed. It's a living feedback loop between action and meaning. You've dismantled the lie that you need motivation to change. You've seen how patterns are protected by reward systems. And you've felt how powerful it is to take aligned action, even when it feels unnatural. But here's the truth that stays with you now. You don't need to feel ready to become consistent. You need to become consistent so your system can start to feel safe. That's the shift. You're no longer chasing a mindset. You're embodying a lifestyle, one that's built on small, honest, repeatable choices. Not for the algorithm, not for applause, but because peace is your new baseline, and you're not negotiating with chaos anymore. And if this felt different from anything you've heard before, that's because it is. This wasn't designed to hype you up. It was designed to wake you up, to pull you out of loops that made you doubt your power, your pace, your potential, to remind you that transformation isn't a weekend project. It's a lived practice, a behavioral truth, a nervous system rewiring from the inside out. And now that you know this, there's no going back. Not because you can't, but because you won't. So here's what I invite you to do next. Pause the noise. Return to the smallest habit that reflects your integrity and double down on it. Every day, even when it's boring, especially when it's hard. Then, share this. Send this to someone who's been silently unraveling. Someone who needs a new way forward, one built on science, truth, and real self-respect. And if you're ready to go further, deeper, into how your environment is reinforcing or eroding your growth, stay with me, because behavior builds mindset, and your behavior is finally telling the truth. Let's keep walking. You're not done. You're just getting started.